But yeah, to kick things off, I guess wanted to touch on what I'm here for today. Obviously, you mentioned about TeacherIn and what we do, but as a starting point, really the rationale is to understand and give our insights as to what our technology has been doing over the last 5 years, how it's helping to change schools in the way that they approach recruitment on the supply front. So the focus for us is a bit more on the supply and how it can assist with transitioning into full-time as well. And so I guess it's the schools that we work with and the way that they've embraced the technology that's what I'll be sort of, I guess, moving through 4 key parts and 4 key, I guess, outcomes that we've learned over the last sort of 4 or 5 years. A little bit of background again about TeacherIn. As you can probably see, it's an app and not an agency, which is our tagline, which does tend to, it's a bit of a mind shift for a lot of those in the education space, especially around supply. And I'll talk through how the market's changed as well as we go through today. But yeah, as a technology piece, it's basically there to allow the connection directly between schools and supply teachers, helping to build the teacher profile and giving them a voice and allowing the school to have more efficiencies and obviously help to reduce costs as well. As you can obviously see, as actually Mark alluded to before as well, being from Australia, I can't hide the accent. So what we've done really, our technology is founded there about 5 years ago, like I mentioned. Over the course of, we've now to about 1,500 schools, I think it is, that have expanded across Australia, New Zealand and Singapore. So quite similar but different markets. I'll get to the UK and how that is very different for everywhere else. We've also got some partnerships into Sweden and Norway in the last 6 months. So it's certainly, I'm not flying everywhere, but I'm certainly, our team is in behind me and working through these opportunities. And then obviously back into the UK in the last sort of 12 months, and again I'll talk about how that's quite dramatic to our findings in other parts of the world too. But what I'll do is, let me just jump on straight in. So I guess I talked quickly before about the outcomes, what we've sort of learnt, the findings we've found over the last 4 or 5 years. And I guess the introduction of technology has given us, like I said, 4 key areas, and these are the outcomes that the schools have been and teachers have sort of presented back to us through the data and so on. That's given us a good indicator as to where the industry is moving and how we can, the schools that they aren't embracing at the moment, what they can do to help embrace technology. So yeah, as a starting point, empowerment, and if we look at online candidate profiles, and I think I've seen that before many a time, very much in the same way. So what we're doing is helping to empower the candidate, giving them more of a, I guess, a candidate-centric experience. And on the back of that, like I mentioned, it's profiles are out there and every day in all varying types of technology platforms. But what our technology is doing is allowing that candidate to connect directly with the school. So it's not bypassing, we're not going via another third party. It's allowing giving the voice to the teacher, so giving them the power to, I'll go through some of the other key points in a moment, but obviously around pay, around support, and enabling them to actually be able to approach schools directly and giving them, I guess, ability to sell themselves to schools too. From a choice perspective, so on both sides, very much so, schools we're finding more and more are wanting obviously to have that choice, to be able to pick the candidates that suit their schools in the best way possible. We've got a few things obviously that I'll talk about in the technology a little bit later on, but for now it's allowing them to select the candidate based upon the algorithms and everything else that goes on behind the scenes, but that's based around obviously history. So the more schools are booking or engaging with a certain teacher, that's helping to automate that selection process as time goes on, based around feedback and a few other mechanisms. When it comes to the community, one area which sort of stands out as being not as technology driven perhaps as others, and for the short and the long term, basically we see the community, or the schools that we work with, forming their own supply communities. And it's a bit of quite a shift from what the mentality is in the UK especially, and I'll obviously talk about that as well. But it's allowing them to build that own pool. So it's not so much about having to go via a jobs board or necessarily having to go via a recruiter all the time. It's allowing that connection to take place and I'll talk about some of the ways. There's a few, again, some quite very simplistic ways that hopefully you can look to implement in your school networks after today, but some of those areas sort of stick around. Something as simple sometimes as adding supply teachers to your communications or your newsletters that are going out from your schools and your school networks. Quite simple in many instances, but a lot of the schools that we started working with back when they first sort of started with us, they aren't doing these things. They're not doing some very basic things that allow that teacher to start feeling part of that school community. If you think from a supply teacher's perspective, they are very isolated. They don't really have one school that they will call home. So what we're looking to do is help that school build that pool and that candidate pool of teachers and help to bring them into the community on an ongoing basis. Things around social, ensuring that the candidates or the teachers are connected to the schools via all their social channels, again, and open days and things like that, and I'll touch on those towards the end as well. And then the last part, obviously, about retention, and of course, as one of the biggest struggles for education recruitment worldwide, is removing that ownership and allowing, I guess retention really is a summary of the first 3 points I've gone through, the empowerment, choice and community, and helping to form that relationship to then retain the teacher as they go through there, whether it's a supply career or into their full-time career as well. And so, as you're all well aware, at different times around the challenges with supply is that as a teacher you've worked at a certain school for a couple of days and had built a great rapport, and as time has gone on, opportunities will arise. Often part of the barrier, or the financial barrier that's put in place, is that inability for the school to be able to engage that teacher on a long-term contract because of the costs that are thrown up in advance. So technology is allowing to build that relationship and help be able to bypass some of those fees that we all know exist. Quickly, just to touch on the market, I guess what's changed, and a lot of some of it's quite obvious. I'm not here to re-educate, especially coming from out here, to educate you on some of these key obvious areas, but just to touch on them, the LA local authority pools that are always there on the supply front. Again, served a great purpose at certain stages, pre a lot of the technology that's here these days. It obviously provided a good voice for the teacher, and be able to communicate with the school, but obviously wasn't overly effective around administration. Moving on to agency world, which we're obviously very much in the last 10, 15 plus years, and will continue on and obviously dominates the market at the moment. Some huge, obviously, efficiencies for schools. There's no ways around it. It's the most efficient way for a school to be able to engage when it comes to no responsibility, but at the same time, it doesn't provide a voice to the teacher. It cuts out their wage and has an impact, obviously, on the overall cost, and I'll mention that as well. And obviously, what's next? Technology. What we're looking to do is try and combine the best of both of those worlds, trying to combine the best of the local authority model, which has obviously the connection with the school and the teacher, obviously trying to reduce those inefficiencies through technology, but then also from the agency world, looking to provide the efficiencies that world does as well. So looking to combine the two through technology is what obviously we've been doing, and I'll go through that as some of the findings like I talked about before that we've come through. Just to quickly move ahead, on the tech side of things, obviously a lot of, we look these days and say, okay, upgrading technology, or upgrading recruitment, I should say, it's not just about the workflow, it's not just about a streamlined workflow, it's actually about a better outcome. So, and that outcome might be around quality, might be around pay and conditions for a teacher. So it's not just about the efficiency side, it's actually what the outcome will generate is just as important. And I guess to stem onto that then is to what's the landscape like now? What are our challenges and what's an everyday supply teacher in this world look like? And as an example, from a landscape perspective on where the money's going, a lot of figures thrown around, as you'll probably see in the media. On the conservative side, £820 million last year spent in supply recruitment through agencies, a lot of money. As you can see, a few shakes of the head and a few concerns, as you can, as we all are, and so that's obviously teachers are always going to need to be booked for certain days. There's no questions around that. Now, what can we do to drive efficiencies and reduce those costs when you're looking at 270 odd millions being spent through commission to agencies? Now, again, the DfE has figures of 30+% on commissions, which we all know they need to be done. We need to get those teachers in the door that day on the supply front again. But how can we, again, use technology to drive those efficiencies? A quick breakdown of what, a very generic-looking supply teacher when it comes to our Gen Y and Gen X, shall we say, and what the demographic is. Over the 50-odd thousand teachers that use our technology, average age is about 27. We've got, but probably as you'll see, that the 26% there, what the alarming stat is that 26% of NQTs are leaving the profession after 3 years. And so that, while we may be able to attract them, and I know our numbers are struggling there, but we can maybe be able to source and attract them, why aren't we retaining these teachers? And I'll touch on part of that as well. In addition, just to mention, obviously, a new age, shall we say, supply teacher obviously wants things on demand, wants availability, wants control. So through technology and allowing her or him to be able to engage with the school and build that relationship is obviously key for what their needs are in this day and age. The landscape, as I've talked about, it's nothing new. Obviously, 3 parts of the process. What technology is allowing us to do now is change that into 2. So again, pretty straightforward, but in many ways, but it's like I said before, it's combining what we used to have in some ways around the local authority pools to some degree with the technology to provide a more streamlined and a better outcome for all. Just around the benefits, just quickly I'll touch on the school, what it means to them, what it means to the teachers, and what our findings are through the last 5 or so years. Let's talk about money first, as we often do. On the right-hand side, again, a local, or a London North borough, I should say, about 100 odd schools, 110 schools last year, spent just shy of £15 million. This is also all freedom of information data. And again, you're looking at, based upon industry stats, of 31% odd on commission, so that 4.6 million is going as commission and fees to agencies in the supply market again. So how can we help to change that? Obviously this is what part of our discussion is today around. Also, I'll touch on some of the savings and what that's meaning for some of these schools just towards the end of the presentation. The benefits to schools, a lot of it's quite obvious, obviously that's up there. Yes, cost savings of course, but the quality and control and the point I mentioned before around choice is being able to pick the right teacher for the school of your choice, for your as a school I should say. The head teacher or the classroom teacher knows the best fit for their kids. It shouldn't be even a third party doing that. It should allow that relationship. So having the choice by being able to engage directly with that candidate is critical for change, and this is what, again, our findings are showing. And then the barrier I mentioned before about full-time and reducing that to transition forward. And I think that's quite often where the retention or recruitment crisis, shall we say, extends from, and often those retention metrics plummet when it comes to that next barrier of transitioning from supply to full-time. And then I guess, yeah, on the teacher side, let's have a quick look at from their perspective. We talked before about the difference in demographic, wanting on demand, everything on demand these days, obviously wanting it through mobile, and wanting a voice back into their say. And so I know obviously the challenges we face around in I guess, recruiting or even sourcing, obviously, the high calibre of teachers into our own pools as a school or a network of schools. It's obviously looking at how we can, the teachers are now in a bit of a position of power in some ways as well to be able to sell themselves back to the school. And so that profiling element I was talking about before, again, like I said before, it's very, the addition of technology onto the traditional online profile, shall we say, is allowing that to happen. It's allowing myself as a supply teacher to be able to actually request to be engaged at a school as opposed to having to wait reactively for a job to be posted or for a recruiter to find me a position. So there's a few things there that help to streamline that, like I mentioned, for a better outcome. Transition we talked about, and CPD of course as well is one of the key factors of course we'll talk about in retention. It's building that community, and how as a school can I provide a better support from my teachers, whether that's a supply teacher that I'm going to use today, whether it's one I'll use in a month. It's helping with that, building that community so there is that relationship on an ongoing basis. Okay, compliance, which is obviously a question that pops up every day of the week, if not twice. So just a quick touch on, obviously, what does the future hold for compliance? What does the future hold for teacher profiles as well on an online basis? Now, obviously, we can attract the teachers, but to keep them compliant is obviously key. And so over the many years, from the local authority models to agency models, it's still that human interaction that must take place, which we all know about, and there's no ways around that. But what can we do to reduce some of that engagement is by allowing things, for example, of putting all those, whether it's the DBS checks, whether it's the work eligibility and so on, within their profile with automated expiry dates and integrations with various third parties. That is basically allowing us to say, well, look, the teacher's expiry is coming up for a certain certificate, that's automatically renders them unavailable and disables their profile. So it doesn't allow for human interaction to take place on a that can be detrimental, obviously, and having a teacher that's not safeguard checked. So there's a few factors around that. But then, of course, on the top of that, there's also around breaking breaking the ice between a school and a candidate, whether that's on a supply front or more, through the use of video CVs. So technology is driven, I guess, advanced quite well in the way that it's allowed schools to shortlist teachers without having to engage with them. You can look at it, you can read off, anyone can write a good CV, and they can stand out, but it's not until sometimes we allow just to say even a few words sometimes and have that initial engagement. Video CVs help to break the ice, generate a short faster, and then take the next stage of whether it's a virtual, whether it's an online interview, or continue through to the face-to-face and the traditional methods. And I guess, to touch on other elements of compliance, which obviously won't go through all today, but all those elements obviously ticked off. But the whole point of this really is to say, how can we automate, not change whether someone's compliant or not. It's how can we change or improve the way that we actually do those checks and so on. Just to finish up, I just want to sort of come back to what we talked about at the very start and our findings and what that's meant. It's sort of not us to be, I guess, putting forward what our schools are telling us. It's what is our schools actually, if they were here to voice their thoughts. These are the 4 things that I mentioned. But I think to take away from today, it's probably looking at what are the things as a school group you can implement, tomorrow, like very straightforward. What can you do over the next 6 months and what can you do over the next 6 years? Technology, who knows, in 6 years' time, facial recognition, all those types of bits and pieces will be amazing to add to that compliance element we just touched on. But I think even for today, or to move onwards from today, it's the community element. I think is one of the ones that is often sort of not always looked upon as a first instance. We talked before about the changing landscape of a teacher or a supply teacher and who they are these days. Obviously, being social is their number one priority, or close to it if not. And so how can we engage the supply teachers via the social channels that a school has or a school network has? And then also, again, about the communication. There's newsletters that are going out for most schools, whether it's weekly or monthly. How can we not tie the supply teachers, or I shouldn't say tie, sorry. How can we add the teachers into that, allowing them to know what's going on at that school, as opposed to, again, I'm not sure how many in the room have ever been a supply teacher in any capacity, but obviously engage them quite a bit, I'm sure, at different stages. And if you can think about it from their perspective, being called upon to work at a school once a month potentially, or once every 6 months, you don't have a real association with that school unless you're in there every day. So how can we try and pull those teachers closer to the school on an everyday basis, and only is going to provide a better outcome for when they're arriving at the school on a daily, for work in the future, and obviously outcomes within the class as well. So.